Hi, is that Yoko?
Yes, this is Yoko.
Hi, it's Joe Madden here from Red Bull Music Academy. How are
Yes,
you?
hi. Yes, I'm okay. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Is Bill free to talk for 10,
Yes,
15 minutes or
he.
so?
Yes, he is.
Fantastic,
Uh,
thank you.
okay, hold on. See,
Okay,
I'm gonna give this to him.
okay.
Hello.
Hi, Bill. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for speaking with me this morning.
No, no problem.
Cool. Okay. So I'll just sort of jump straight into it. So do you recall how you and Pete Coleman sort of first met? Was it you reaching out to him or him reaching out to you?
Um, I want to get it right, but it's
Okay.
been a while. He contacted me. I remember by telephone. It was my studio was in Brooklyn in those days,
Yeah.
and he called and he said he was, Pete Namlook, Peter Coleman, and
Yeah.
the reason he called me is because I had sampled some sound from one of his records, and I don't remember. He had already put out quite a few things,
Yeah.
and he called about one particular record, which I don't remember which one. There's so many,
Yeah.
but I had clearly sampled some kind of noises from that record, and they were pretty distinct. You could definitely spot them,
Yeah.
and I didn't take that into consideration because I don't remember where I was putting the sample, but I figured it was probably on something that wouldn't be so noticeable. Like it wouldn't be a record that everybody's listening to,
Yeah.
and not too promoted. I can't remember the record either. But he called me and said, I obviously hear my sounds on your record that you've sampled some things, and should I sue you or should we collaborate?" And I said, well, probably in terms of time, a time factor, why don't you just go ahead and sue me like everybody else is? So just do that, and because a collaboration would seems like a lot of work,
Yeah.
and that was the kind of a joke for him, and
Yeah.
then we spoke a little bit, and then we decided let's do something. So we started communicating, and he went to Brooklyn a couple of times. The studio, I went to Germany a few times.
Yeah.
We never did anything live, but we didn't do a lot of back and forth. It was usually um, things that we would do together. Like I would be either with him or he would come to New York, and
Yeah.
um, but we ended up doing quite a bit of recordings, and I don't know the number, but there's quite a lot of.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you're both people who thrive on sort of collaboration. What was he like to work alongside?
Oh, very really professional and sense of humor, but kind of serious. And
Yeah.
we didn't always do it under the best conditions. Like I remember one of the last things I played on for him. I was touring in Europe, or playing in Frankfurt, I guess, at a festival.
Yeah.
And I went to his place, and we didn't really even have a proper way to record the bass. I think I played directly into his laptop, which is terrible.
Yeah.
And that was one of the last recordings. So when he came to Brooklyn, we were set up professionally, but a lot of times in his place was just kind of a home studio at the time.
Yeah.
We didn't always do it under the best professional kind of conditions, and
Yeah.
it's maybe not that noticeable, but it could have been done a lot better in
Yeah.
some cases. But there is a lot of stuff, and I don't recall those days we were kind of emailing music back and forth.
Yeah.
It was more to do with like email, sending a cassette with sounds on it, or
Yeah.
playing it playing it there in whatever studio we were in. So,
Yeah. So I guess sort of with your earlier stuff, particularly you two, it would have been the time before sort of the internet and software kicked in terms of sort of avant-garde and electronic music. It was still very much sort of hardware based and cassettes back and
yeah,
forth rather than files.
yeah, it was. I think CDs back and forth would have been possible
Yeah.
for sure, but wasn't a lot of online sending. Like now, somebody asks you to do something like that, it takes 5 minutes. You just send it back and forth, and
Yeah.
that wasn't the case with those records.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, did you sort of learn anything from him in terms of production techniques or methods of working or process or anything like that? Did he have any sort of unique way of doing things?
Um, well, for one thing, we shared the idea that we work quickly,
Yeah.
he wasn't really second guessing anything. Uh, Definitely no wasting time at all. It
Yeah.
was all down to, okay, I like this, and for the most part, he kind of agreed with everything that I did, and I don't think I ever questioned anything. He was like, if he might start the session by playing some kind of textures or sounds or even rhythms,
Yeah.
and I just tried to adapt to it, and I think we were both concerned about getting it done, getting the best results, but getting them done quickly.
Right.
And that's why he had so many records, because he could do it really quickly.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know.
And was that down to because obviously you'd only be in the same place for a set amount of time, so without the luxury of being able to sort of bounce stuff backwards and forwards, I guess that sort of focused your efforts a bit because you had to do it while you're both in the same room, pretty much.
Yeah, and it really speeds up the process of knowing that you kind of have to get it done within that time. There's not going to be any. We'll try it again tomorrow.
Yeah.
So yeah, it made the focus a lot focused. And I
Yeah.
and I like that. I guess that's why we kind of got along and agreed on things, because he did things very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, he had an incredible synth collection. I believe it was one of the sort of largest in Europe at one point. I mean, what would you say was his most sort of prized piece of equipment? Or is there anything that you
Um,
saw there that you sort of coveted?
well, he had a theremin,
Yeah,
which was a real one. I think he worked with the guy that invented the. I can't remember the name, but
yeah,
the theremin, whoever made that, and he got into using that. He had it's a programmable synthesizer where it's got a peg board,
right.
and I think it's called AKG Synthia, and they used to come in a briefcase, so you open it, and then there's two sides to it. One is kind of the patch bay,
Yeah,
and the other side is the kind of controllers, volume, whatever knobs.
yeah,
But that was unusual, and you didn't see those too much. It was very special,
yeah,
and I think they're worth a lot of money now if you find one
yeah,
online or something. I remember that, and the theremin, and that he had always really good Studer cassette machine, Studer CD, and a Studer, I believe, something cassette CD and something else. But they were all the same, and those are very high end,
yeah,
kind of reproduction, primitive, but that's all there was then. But he had the very best for making copies with those machines.
yeah,
And he had a very small room there. As far as the synthesizer collection, it wasn't where I was at the home where I was. I didn't see a lot. There wasn't a lot of gear there, just
Yeah,
basic things.
yeah. I mean, obviously, he was incredibly prolific, and which is, he's left behind an enormous back catalogue. Do you think that can
Yeah.
be maybe a little bit sort of intimidating to newcomers? Because it's kind of, people who are just sort of trying to get into Pete Namlook a little bit, and they're sort of overwhelmed by, his Discogs pages, 200 plus albums. Nobody seems to be able to keep track of them all. I mean, it is.
I think there's a lot more than that actually.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I can't. I've been trying to fathom out the full size of it, and I can't. I can't quite get to grips with it. So, do you think
Yeah.
that's maybe sort of not damaging to his legacy a little bit, but is it making it difficult for new generations to discover him? Maybe just because it's kind of overwhelming.
It's definitely overwhelming, and for somebody just getting into it, if they're going to buy all those, I think there's over 500
Yeah,
and I remember saying 500 like a long time ago, so
yeah,
it could be more. But to get really into it and go through all of that, like there's that wooden box that came out,
yeah,
which is ambitious, but it's not, it's nowhere near what his catalog contains. I mean, it would be overwhelming to people,
yeah,
but you have to maybe just find a way to takes time, but just to go through it, and it's pretty diverse considering it's really based on electronic and ambient music. He gets into quite a few areas, and there are certain artists that are completely different from others. Like
yeah,
some of it's like dance music, and I did a whole kind of series of using kind of nature and music from Mongolia and weird, African music, and it's all kind of submerged in this ambience.
yeah,
And then there was a series of records with Klaus Schultz, which were pretty different from some of the others, but he had Tetsu Inoue and all those. It goes on and
yeah,
on forever. That I guess that wooden box is probably a good. Obviously, I've never listened to the whole thing, but
yeah,
it's a probably good example for somebody if they just want to get a taste of what he had done.
yeah,
I don't think it hurts his legacy or the memory of him.
yeah,
It's pretty, even though there's so much recordings, it's still pretty obscure,
yeah,
and people would have to dig deep into it. And I'm a little out of touch with who's in that kind of direction right now.
yeah,
So I don't know how it affects the future.
yeah. I mean, what do you think it was that sort of motivated him to work so tirelessly, and he's, released so many records, collaborated with so many people? What was it that was driving him? Was it just an urge to see what could be done, or an urge to sort of, build a huge sort of catalogue of diversity, or what was it that was driving him? Do you think?
Well, for one, he was kind of intense and sort of precise, and I guess that's the German
Yeah,
coming out of him. And what he told me was that when he worked in a bank and he played guitar, and the music he was listening to was like fusion, like Return to Forever and that kind of stuff. And he
yeah,
was playing very conventional guitar, like nothing to do with ambient music, nothing strange or experimental or outside of just this fusion interest.
yeah,
And he said he used to when he would leave work, for some reason he always had his guitar with him, and he would pass by this river, and he used to sit down and play on the bank of the river, and the river made a sound like an ambient sound.
yeah,
So he started realizing he could play with that and not necessarily this other more common style of playing or style of music. So that
yeah,
river and that sound that it was making in nature is what put him in that direction of this kind of ambient sound.
yeah,
And I think because he was kind of intense and, you know, probably wanted to like more than a few records, he probably just liked the feeling of keep piling it on, kind of thing, and collaborating with
Yeah.
other people.
Yeah.
Because once I got to know him, he was very determined to get me on as many things as possible.
Right.
And he was always asking about certain musicians. And I remember when I played in Frankfurt, one time I played with Jack DeJohnette, the drummer.
Yeah.
And the opening band was it was European musicians, but Cindy Blackman is a drummer. She was playing with them, and he was recording like everything at the sound check, and like I think he probably ended up cutting all that up and making something out of it. So
really?
He was conscious of the environment and the sound he's in, and I think that whole story of the river, he was very conscious of nature and that music should relate to nature, which is definitely that's a good idea. It's you can't really miss with that. So.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So last question. From the time that you spent with Pete, what's your sort of favourite abiding memory of him?
Well, he had a sense of humor. It was.
Yeah.
He was laughing a lot. He was smiling a lot, and he realized that if I'm at his place, that if he gives me enormous amounts of wine, that I would probably play a little longer and maybe even a little better. So he was always laughing about his wine, because he had a how do you call it, a collection of wine out. It wasn't at his house. It was out in the country somewhere.
Yeah.
And he used to bring these German wines into his home from the countryside.
Yeah.
And he was always very proud of that. And it was very funny, because I think he thought that was going to enhance whatever I do. So, and he's probably right. So.
Fantastic. Okay, that's brilliant, Bill. Thanks so much for sharing that with us today.
No problem.
And I'll send a link over to Yoko once it's live, so you can take a look at it.
That'd be great.
Okay,
Thanks
brilliant.
a lot.
Thanks a lot.
All
Cheers.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye.